will call the Revenue Committee to order. Judy, will you please call the roll?
Senator French. Senator Ide.
Here.
Senator McEwen.
Here.
Senator Pappas.
Here.
Chairman Biden.
Here.
Biden, excuse me.
All right, thank you. First bill up for our consideration is Senate File 171, Wyoming Second Amendment Financial Privacy Act, sponsored by Senator Larson. Senator Larson, you're here. Walk us through the bill, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, committee members. See if I got that close enough. So yes, I bring you Wyoming Second Amendment Financial Privacy Act. I'm bringing this because I'm concerned that banks and credit card companies and such financial institutions will be able to track gun sales with their new codes that they've changed. They used to be guns and ammunition, and that were put under a code of sporting goods. And so now they've changed it just this summer. I think the announcement was that they can be able to track ammunition sales and gun purchases. So that's pretty much what the bill is. Definitely don't want that information to be able to get to agencies or law enforcement without due cause. I mean, if there's a criminal out there, or if somebody's acting in a way they shouldn't, then maybe that information maybe should be able to. But I'll go through the bill. Section 1 just states some findings that I would like to put in the bill. That the Second Amendment to the United States Constitution guarantees the people the right to keep and bear arms. It states that in September of 2022, the world's 3 largest payment card networks publicly announced they would assign a unique merchant category code to firearms retailers accepting payment cards for purchases. And this was after 28 members of Congress sent a public letter to networks pressuring them to adopt the new code. The letter to the payment card, item 3, in the letter to the payment card networks, federal lawmakers stated that the new merchant category code for firearms retailers would be the first step towards facilitating the collection of valuable financial data that could help law enforcement in countering the financing of terrorism efforts. Maybe that's an okay deal, but we sure don't need it to follow our citizens. Expressing a clear government expectation that networks would utilize the new merchant category code to conduct mass surveillance of constitutionally protected firearms and ammunition purchases in cooperation with law enforcement. The new merchant category code will allow banks, payment network or card networks, acquirers, and other entities involved in payment card processing to identify and separately track lawful payment card purchases at firearm retailers in the state, paving the way for unprecedented surveillance of Second Amendment activity and information shared between financial institutions and the government. The potential for this cooperative surveillance will put a chilling effect on citizens wishing to exercise their federal and state constitutional rights to keep and bear arms in this state. While on Section 6, while federal law requires some financial institutions to report transactions that are highly indicative of money laundering or other unlawful activities, there's no federal or state law authorizing financial institutions to surveil and track lawful activities of customers in cooperation with law enforcement. Item 7, the act shall be construed as generally applicable consumer financial protection law that does not prevent or significantly interfere with duly authorized powers of any bank, nor does this article directly or indirectly discriminate against any bank based on its charter or structure. And finally, based on the above stated findings, it is the intent of the legislature to prohibit the misuse of payment card processing systems to surveil, report, or otherwise discourage constitutionally protected firearm and ammunition purchases and sales within this state. And then when Section 2, we create some new statutes The next part is 139, 122. That's where we bring in the new statute, liability and financial privacy. Guess I can go ahead and read that. A government entity is liable for damages resulting from the violation of this new statute caused by the negligent, reckless, or intentional acts of public employees while acting within the scope of their duties. Okay, so in Article 4, it will be the Second Amendment, financial privacy. In 1310-401, we talk about the definitions. We define assign and assignment. We define who the customer is. We define what the customer's protected financial information is, what a disclosure is. Tell us that we define what a financial institution is, and we keep on going, describe what a firearm retailer is, and then we describe what a firearms code means, and it means any code or other indicator a financial institution assigns to a merchant or to a payment card transaction that identifies whether a card or whether a merchant is a firearms retailer or whether the payment card transaction involves a purchase or firearm or ammunition. The term shall include, but is not limited to, the merchant category code assigned to a retailer by a payment card network or other financial institution. We describe what a government entity is, what the merchant is, what the payment card is. And then finally, protected financial information means any record of a sale, purchase, return, or refund involving a payment card that is retrieved, categorized, generated, labeled, or sorted, or grouped based on the assignment of this firearm code. The next part, we deal with disclosure of financial information prohibitions and exceptions. In Section A on page 8, a financial institution shall not disclose a customer's protected financial information, and a government entity shall not access or obtain the information unless, in item I, otherwise required by law, and protected financial information is not singled out, segregated, or disclosed based on the assignment of a firearm code. Item 2, the disclosure is made pursuant to a valid warrant issued in a criminal investigation stating the grounds and probable cause of the issuance. So there you go. We can get the law enforcement can get their information if needed there. And the customer has provided written authorization for disclosure, and or the disclosure is made pursuant to a subpoena or to a grand jury subpoena. The next section, 1310-403, describes how a disclosure is authorized. If a customer has given them written authorization, and these things need to be followed. A statement that the customer consents to the disclosure of the protected financial information for a specific period. There's other items where they need to meet if they want to do the disclosure. The final one, obviously, got to have the customer's signature. Section B, the written
Senator,
authorization.
Can I ask you a quick question?
Yes, sorry.
Before we move on from this, is this an opt-in or an opt-out provision?
This is an opt-in. So the customer, like if you were going to, to a bank to get a credit card, it's in parts of this, it says that they can't do it to force you into this.
Got it. Thank
If you want to get an account at their bank or such, they can't do that.
Okay.
Statement that the customer understands his rights to revoke the consent at any time and stuff like that are in here. So it's an opt-in. There's part B is what I was just describing. The written authorization described in this section shall not be required as a condition of doing business or transacting with this financial institution. Okay, and then we'll go to page 11. Describe some subpoena requirements. If a subpoena issued by the government entity requires disclosure of the customer's protected financial information, A financial institution shall only disclose the information if the subpoena meets the following requirements. This is on page 11. The subpoena must state the protected financial information being sought. In addition to the service on the financial institution, a copy of the subpoena shall be served on the customer, and the subpoena shall contain a certification that the service was executed on the customer. So the customer knows that the bank or the government entity is asking for it from a financial business. Bottom of page 11, 1310-405, discriminatory conduct. A financial institution shall not use a firearms code to engage in the following discriminatory conduct. They can't decline a lawful payment card transaction based on the assignment of the firearm code to the merchant or transaction. They can't limit or decline to a business with a customer or potential customer or merchant based on the assignment of the firearm code to previous lawful transactions involving the customer and potential customer. They can't charge a higher transaction or interchange fee to a merchant or for a lawful transaction as compared to the fee charged to similarly situated merchant or for similar transaction. And they can't take any action against a customer or merchant that is intended to suppress lawful commerce involving firearms. The next part, 1310-406, we go into civil actions. A customer may bring a civil action for damages against any financial institution or government entity that causes the customer's protected financial information to be disclosed in violation of this act. It can be any person who negligently or recklessly violates this act for $10,000, or it can be against a person who intentionally violates this act. That was intentionally violates it. It could be up to $25,000. And those numbers, we could talk about. I threw them in there. No real reason. And then part B, a customer or merchant. The other one was on customers. So this one's on a customer or merchant aggrieved by a violation of this act. Statute 1310-405 may bring a civil action for damages up to $30,000. Or actual damage, whichever is greater. I guess I got that wrong. So $30,000 or actual damages. And also part C, pursuant to a lawsuit, court finds that a violation of this act has occurred, the court shall award reasonable attorney fees to the aggrieved party. So those that are bringing the lawsuit can get their fees paid for. So the next part is granting immunity. This one just says that the government entity and its public employees, while acting within the scope of the duties, are granted immunity from liability for tort, except as provided in these statutes. And then we added this one. That is pretty much the bill, Mr. Chairman, and I'll see if I can answer any questions. If not.
Thank you for the explanation, Senator Larson. Any questions for Senator Larson? Any questions? Well, it's a sad state of affairs that we have to even bring legislation like this, and previously legislation to stop banks and businesses from circumventing the governmental process to implement their own political agenda. And I appreciate you bringing this to us. We're going to take some testimony and from agencies and the general public, and we'll work this bill and let you know if we have any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman
you,
of
sir.
the committee.
Anybody from the agencies wish to speak? Come on up.
Good afternoon. My name is Jeremiah Bishop. I'm the State Banking Commissioner and head of the Wyoming Division of Banking. I don't believe I've ever presented in front of this committee before, so thanks for the opportunity. I have a few areas to cover on these bills, about five different areas, but I'll keep them, we'll move through them very quickly. Overall, just my concerns with the firearm merchant category code, the disclosure provision, the discrimination provision. I'd like to clarify my enforcement powers as the commissioner, and then some potential cleanup items or questions around the bill. The first item is the Division of Banking is charged with supervising, examining, and regulating Wyoming state banks for safety and soundness, which includes protecting consumers of Wyoming state banks. The Division of Banking does not license, charter, supervise, examine, or take action against most of the types of companies involved in credit card transactions. However, I would say I am concerned about the use of the firearm merchant category code because it doesn't appear to have any beneficial, it doesn't appear to be beneficial to protect banks, protect consumers, enhance the safety and soundness of banks, or improve regulation. To my knowledge, this is something maybe the banks can speak more on, but to my knowledge, banks do not currently use or even possibly even see merchant category codes. That's something that maybe they can speak on, banks that are actually involved in issuing credit cards. Overall, I have no objection to putting guardrails around how merchant codes are used by Wyoming financial institutions and allowing the division to enforce those rules against Wyoming institutions. The next area is just some comments on the disclosure provisions of the bill. Regarding the disclosure provisions, this bill's disclosure provision would prohibit our Wyoming state banks, among others, from disclosing a customer's record of a transaction that is assigned a firearm merchant category code, subject to some exceptions. I think that was described by the sponsor. I have no objection to the idea that a Wyoming state bank should not ordinarily disclose a singled out customer transaction with a firearm merchant category code, subject to some exceptions. I might have some concern if the disclosure provisions make it difficult for Wyoming state banks as a practical matter to provide services related to credit card transactions for firearms. That could devalue the overall Wyoming State Bank charter if they are subject to certain restrictions. This bill would also prohibit a government entity, including the Division of Banking, from accessing or obtaining a customer's record of a transaction that is assigned a code, subject to some exceptions. I cannot recall any time the Division of Banking or staff has singled out a customer transaction based on a merchant code of any kind. It's not something that we generally look at because, again, it doesn't really have any effect on safety and soundness of the institution, which is our primary concern. The next area is just the discrimination provisions. I think this was discovered that, regarding the discrimination provision, that the bill's discrimination provision would prohibit our Wyoming banks, among others, from using a firearm code to discriminate against merchants, customers, and potential customers in several ways. I'm not currently aware of any evidence that Wyoming state banks do discriminate based on the firearm merchant category code, but I have no objection to a bill that would prohibit a Wyoming bank from discriminating against anybody using that merchant code. The next item, enforcement issues. Regarding enforcement, just want to make sure I do not have authority to examine for compliance or enforce this bill on most of the financial institutions as defined in this bill. Our enforcement rights are for enforcement against a Wyoming financial institution, which includes a bank, savings and loan association, special purpose depository institution, or trust company, chartered or organized under the laws of Wyoming. So those are the institutions we have enforcement and examination authority over. Title 13 also gives me examination of authority, but those examinations are focused on these institutions, like I said. I will say that this bill does apply to a much broader group of defined financial institutions as it's defined in this bill. I just want to point out that the Wyoming financial institutions are who we oversee. And with that, we just don't have that examination authority for payment card networks, credit card networks, payment processors, gateways, or most credit card issuers. And one thing I just want to be clear as it relates to that, if this bill becomes law and my office receives a Wyoming consumer calling with a complaint against a credit card network, we just don't have the authority to take action on that complaint if it's against a credit card network. This bill, however, does authorize civil actions. And so if an entity that falls outside of our enforcement authority the civil actions are where the enforcement authority will have to come from if it's in Wyoming. Yeah, to summarize, I'm definitely very concerned about the firearm merchant category code, and I don't think it's useful in the regulation of financial institutions. But my focus, if this bill becomes law, will have to be on how this affects Wyoming institutions. The final area is just potential questions I have on the bill. Under section 1310-402, it says a government entity is allowed to access or obtain a customer's protected financial information under certain exceptions. One of those exceptions is the written authorization from a customer. However, the section on written authorization in 1310-403 does not pertain to a government entity giving written authorizations. I believe it only pertains to how a financial institution may get that authorization from the customer. And so if there was ever an instance, for example, where us as a government entity needed that information, this bill isn't exactly clear on how we would get that authorization. So that's maybe something that could be clarified either by the sponsor or this committee. And an example where this might came up is, again, if a customer submits a complaint to our office, would we have to get that written authorization directly from the customer? That's not really, if that was the case, that's not currently spelled out in this bill. And so we'd have to find some other way, maybe working with a financial institution to first get that disclosure. That's just a general question on how that process would work. That's all the comments I have, but I'd definitely like to stand for any questions from the committee.
Thank you, Mr. Bishop. Any questions for Mr. Bishop? We'll start with Senator McEwen and then work our way around.
I just want to make sure I understand this. I don't want the government knowing if I bought a Twinkie, let alone a gun. Would you agree we kind of need to be aimed at the credit card and debit card processing sites versus the banks and the financial institutes? And the reason I ask you that is, I think I heard during your testimony, you really don't see what I'm doing with my card anyway from the bank. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Bishop?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Senator. Yes, as the government entity, we see transactions at the bank level, perhaps with accounts. However, that's generally only as it affects safety and soundness. As far as these merchant codes go, our office really never sees those. I'm not even sure if the bank sees that. We might need testimony from banks to verify that, but that's not something our division of banking is really even familiar with, just because, like I said, it doesn't even affect the safety and soundness. So that's not our focus. So if it does affect credit card issuers, or not issuers, but credit card payment companies, such as the major companies, we don't have any interaction with those companies because we're not given authority to even examine or supervise or bring enforcement action to those companies. So I think that'd be a policy decision, but we can't provide much input on that.
I think Senator McEwen has a follow-up to that.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I just want to make sure I understand, when you say safety and soundness, you're talking fraud or somebody using a card they're not supposed to use, not necessarily where the card's been used. Am I understanding that? Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Bishop?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, so safety and soundness, when we use that word, that phrase very commonly in bank regulation, that's just the overall safety and soundness of, I'm going to use banks, for example, of the bank. What is their risk to that bank of the activities they have? What's their risk management practices? And does it have an effect on the financial and safety condition of that bank? Our primary goal obviously is if a bank fails, that has major problems with consumers. And so therefore we try to prevent that by supervising for safety and soundness at the bank level. Is there a risk that could put that bank at risk of possibly failure and hurting Wyoming consumers? So that's generally what we mean by safety and soundness.
Thank you, Mr. Bishop. Senator Ide?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Bishop, question I have is, how do it sounds like these large payment card companies can arbitrarily throw somebody into a unique merchant category code. I mean, what's the litmus test to get thrown into that category, and who else is on there? I mean, who do they target? Like Senator McKeon said Twinkie companies or pocket knife. I mean, just a little, background on how that all works. Thank you.
Mr. Bishop?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Senator. I will say I'm definitely not an expert at these merchant codes. Like I said, we don't deal with them in our office. My understanding, this is just some research we did. This is from Visa. There are currently 500 merchant category codes. They could be for transportation services, utility services, clothing stores, miscellaneous, maybe government services. And I think they might go more specific than that. These are just examples. I'm not sure how specific they go. I mean, it's just because I'm not overly familiar with that entire line of the business.
Senator Pappas?
Yeah, I guess that's one thing I need to get a handle on, what a merchant code is. Because that's a concept I'm not familiar with. And so, for instance, if I go into Walmart, I can buy a gallon of milk, right? Or I can buy a firearm and ammunition, right? Or I can buy an auto parts thing. So is the merchant, Walmart or your good store, Senator? Does it a single code, or are there like subcodes so that a merchant, if I'm paying for a firearm, there's a specific code for that product. So every product has a code. Could you enlighten me?
Was that to Mr. Bishop or Senator McEwen, the good store owner? Senator McEwen, do you have an answer for that?
I do. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's all driven, everything we do has a UPC, or that little code when you pick it up. And that code defines what category it goes into. So if you were to buy a gallon of milk, it would be listed as a food product. If you went next door and bought beer or wine or something, that would be listed as liquor or alcohol. If you bought toilet paper or toilet bowl cleaner, that would come up as general merchandise. And it's, when we put it in the system, it's all driven by the categories that we assign what department to. And then it just tracks it. And your credit card companies can pull all that information out of the system. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you for that clarification. Any questions for Mr. Bishop before we let him go? Thank you so much. Thank you. Appreciate it. Senator Bouchard, I see you here. Do you have anything to say on this bill? Welcome to Revenue.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Anthony Bouchard, Senate District 6. I would just like to stand in support of the bill. I'd also like to answer some of the questions. These new codes, gun stores were labeled as miscellaneous. And so now they're getting their own code. So to me, I see anything you purchase at a gun store now is going to get labeled, not just a gun. It could be a gun purse for women, or it could be a holster for. All these things are going to be characterized as. I mean, I think they're trying to make gun owners hostile, is my opinion. But I want to talk about all these veils with the banks. The banks don't know what this is going on over here, and the merchant doesn't know what's going on over here. I say hogwash. And the reason I say that, if you go and look at the bottom of all of these credit card processing companies, they're all owned by banks. And if you look at the way that when you sign someone up for merchant services, full disclosure, I used to do that, it's all tied to the bank. I mean, it's tied to the bank on the front end, it's tied to the back end. As a matter of fact, if you look at all the major services, and I'll just pull one up right now if I can real quick, Bank Card USA, Merchant Services. You scroll down to the bottom of their page, and it says, and I'm, pardon my time here, I know I saw it a minute ago. Now that I pull it in front of me, it's not there. Anyway, it says Wells Fargo Bank at the bottom of that credit card processing page. So what's really troubling here is there is a brokerage business on the other side. So these guys sell that data. I'm not saying they're going to specifically sell this. We don't know yet, but we do know there's data that gets sold. They know And for instance, in the political world, if you want to raise money, you can find people that buy certain things. That's how they track that data. That's how you acquire lists. There's a brokerage out there, they're selling that data. It's about money. And so as we move into this surveillance world, there's a real problem here. I mean, now what happens if the political operatives that want to label all the gun owners want to buy that data and put a list out there? I mean, it almost becomes a list that even it could become a gun registry list. So I don't think people need to take a real look here at how banks are using this data. And I really question people, oh, we don't know what's going on over here, that, the merchant does this and the merchant credit card company does this, and they're all in contract together. They have a fiduciary contract with each other. So they're all holding hands. The merchant data, it could potentially end up on lists. And this is dangerous. It should have never happened on the federal level. Now, as a state, I think we need to take action. Maybe this bill's not perfect, but we need to roll in a direction to start opening these layers and looking what's going on. So in support of the bill, I'll stand for any questions.
Any questions for Senator Bouchard? Not at the moment. Thank you, sir, for your testimony. Open up for general public comment. If there's no other agencies that wish to come on down, hear from the bankers. Mr. Meyer, good to see you again, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's getting to be a habit. It's okay, though. Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, Scott Meyer with the Wyoming Bankers Association. I think that there needs to be a few things that are clarified before we get into this. First of all, we know where you're coming from. We get it. We don't like it either. The merchant category codes, the MCCs, those are set by an organization called the ISO, which is the International Organization of Standardization. That has nothing to do with banks. They set these codes. And it's not the UPC codes that you see on the cans or whatever. This is a code that they give to different industries and different organizations or whatever they're selling, whatever. They put out these codes. And banks don't have any say in what's doing on those codes. Banks don't do anything with those codes. I'll give you the one exception. There's a very progressive bank in New York called Amalgamated Bank, who pressured, along with a very famous Senator Warren, to have the ISO put these firearm codes in there. That's where they came from. We don't like it. You don't like it. Nobody likes it. But that has nothing to do with banks. So I respectfully disagree with the prior testimony that they're all holding hands. They don't. Banks have nothing to do with these. Now, let's just talk a little bit for the benefit of some of you as to how this works, these codes. Like the TV commercial that you've seen, what's in your wallet? If you look at it, I've got cards in my wallet. One of them tells me that I can get cash back on all my purchases. But if I elect, I can get up to 5% more cash, up to a certain amount if I shop at a grocery store for this next 3 months. That is determined by these MCCs, these codes. That tells you that when I go in there and use this card and I go to the grocery store, I get a bigger kickback. Versus if I go use that same code, that same card at a hardware store, it doesn't. So you go, okay, well, I know if I use this card more at the grocery store this month, I'm going to get a little bit more money back. The same thing goes with these codes with respect to like an airline card. If you use that card to buy groceries, they give you a mile per dollar. But if you use that card to buy your airline ticket, then you get 2 miles or 3 or whatever it is. These codes are how they establish that. So you understand where the codes are coming from. The codes are set for each individual type of store, but some stores that are really big, and I want to, the comment that was made about Walmart, I don't know how Walmart does, but if you do one of these really big department stores, they may have a special code for fragrances that the women in the women's shop have versus one that's in the automotive department. But mostly they have the code for that store. There are different codes for different stores in different locations. And so you may have ABC Hardware here and you may have ABC Hardware in Nebraska. They may have different codes because they may be focusing on different things. That's the whole point of the codes. It just got taken advantage of by these people that never should have had a chance to do that. And it's offensive to everybody. I will tell you that if you take your credit card out, you might have a credit card in your wallet that says an airline on it. But if you look at it closely, it'll say Visa or MasterCard. Those are the credit card processors. Those are the ones that use those codes and assign it to whatever things that are going on there. Banks have nothing, absolutely nothing to do with these codes. We don't get to suggest them. We don't get to change them. We don't even know who's you got what code. Your Wyoming banks literally, you may have a local bank here, First National Bank, and you can get their credit card, but if you look on it again, it'll say a Visa or MasterCard. That's do it. They issue it out in our name. Great. We might get a kickback out of it, but we absolutely get nothing on those codes, and we don't get any information on those codes. We have no idea who used what card for what purpose at what store at any point in time. That information is just not made available. And nor is it not made available, we don't want it. We could care less. You're using our card, great. We might have a processing fee that we get a percentage of, but mostly that's all done by the credit card processors. The 2, 3, 5%, whatever, some of those cards charge an enormous amount. That's how they make their money, is by doing that. It has nothing to do with the banks. I will tell you that these codes can be very important for a lot of reasons, not only just figuring out who gets what and here's these rewards or whatever that might be out there, but there are certain entities, certain businesses that may have to be tagged as high risk. And I'm not talking firearms or anything like that. I'm talking about businesses that may be mostly known for money laundering. And if that's the case, maybe the government has a right. I don't know, but it has nothing to do with your banks. That's what they're doing. Another example might be that if your business so elects, they may have a special code on there. If you are able to, if you have the right to charge back to the customer that credit card processing fee. So pick the state of Wyoming, just for example. I file organizations all the time with the Secretary of State. I can use that credit card. Up to a certain point, they just charge me $2 credit card processing fee. That is how it knows it, because of that code. So they don't have to go in there and make sure that, okay, we have to manually input that stuff. Those things are triggered by the codes. Some businesses are able to use those codes, is my understanding, the merchants, to track inventory. I don't know that. I think that's UPC stuff. I think that those product codes are what they do that on. But I've been told that sometimes those codes depend on if it's a big enough store, it may be used to track inventory. But again, those are not anything that has to do with the bank. So my point is, we get it. We don't like it any more than you do, and we'd like to see it stopped. But I want you to consider the following things. First of all, because I said that stuff had to do, those codes can actually have rewards. Imagine an organization like the NRA coming out and saying, you use our card and you go in there and buy our firearms, we'll give you points. Now maybe that's gone. I don't know. I'm just saying that could possibly be one of those avenues where you say, geez, that had a little bit of an unintended consequence. I'm not sure how those things work. You can get stuff with Cabela's or Bass Pro Shop. I've seen them on the signs out wherever. You can have points built on those. Based upon those codes, they know what you're buying at the store versus what I'm buying over at the hardware store. The bill as written is almost impossible for your banks to survive on this. They would be almost immediately in violation of this law. Because they can't change the codes, because they have no way of disputing have no dispute resolution with the ISO or the payment processors or anybody else that assigns those codes, we have nothing to do that. But because this banking industry is so highly regulated by the feds and by the state, that any kind of idea of providing notice or disclosures would be almost impossible. So automatically, we'd already be in violation of this. And on top of that, we wouldn't even be able to build a proper compliance program to make sure that we're in compliance with this program. You put a target on the back of every Wyoming bank by doing this bill, the way it's written right now. And then finally, what I'd like to tell you is that the compliance, when you're out of compliance, what are the penalties? And you got the civil action. I'll remind you that a couple of years ago, the legislature passed a bill called the Financial Discrimination Bill for Firearms. And in that bill, they had people who thought they were aggrieved had two options. They could either take it to the Attorney General or they could file suit on their own. And what has happened since that time? People come up to the banks and say, you're discriminating against me. We're going to file a lawsuit. Banks say, well, what do you want? Well, we want $25,000, $50,000. What's a bank going to do? Are they going to fight it? They're going to spend twice as much money on legal fees as it would be to pay these guys out, and think of the PR nightmare. So this is happening all the time already. This stuff, in my opinion, is legalized extortion. You put this gun into the hands of these people that say, we'll accuse you, and either you fight it and have a bad press day, or you pay us the $25,000 or $50,000. And of course, they're all signed with confidentiality and everything else, so the bank has to give it up. And this happens all the time in Wyoming now. This provision here is not good for us. It's bad policy. It's bad policy for Wyoming to have that kind of stuff. So with that being said, Mr. Chairman, I have put into your folders a couple of amendments I thought maybe we could look at. We could live with the bill if we can make some changements on this thing. The first change I have on there is on page 5 to delete lines 11 through 18, the assign or assigns. This is so broad that it would encompass anything and everything a bank does, and we have nothing to do with this. We are going to be crucified for something we cannot control. We have no to say, nothing else. So I would delete that section. The next one is that I would amend on line 2, page 7, where it says firearms code. I would put in there means a merchant category code, so that we know exactly which codes we're dealing with. And then I would suggest deleting on line 7, page 7, following that period, all the rest of lines 8 and 9. And then finally, Mr. Chairman, I would suggest that we just eliminate that civil actions that allow a customer or anybody else to just bring a lawsuit. If this is really critical, let them address the Attorney General, like there's a provision for under the other statute that says the Attorney General can bring something if they think a bank's involved. But I tell you right now, every reference into this bill regarding a bank has no place in this. Banks do not do that. Banks cannot do that. Even if they wanted to do it, they cannot do it. It's against the law. It's against the regulations. We have no ability to. And just from a fact-driven standpoint, we cannot do that. What we're really tired of, and I think you folks are too, is that we're really getting tired of being the pawn, stuck into these political plans that go out there because of places like Amalgamated Bank and Senator Warren. We're sick of it. You don't use us to go further your social agenda. Leave us alone. We will deal with our customers. We will help whatever we can with our customers. And gun rights, the Second Amendment is all important to every one of your Wyoming banks. With that, Mr. Chairman, I certainly stand for any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Meyer. Senator French has a question for you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I might be out in the weeds here, so bear with me. So if a bank in Cheyenne issues, like you said, a credit card, and down there it states a major credit card, there's 2 or 3 of them that are the big players in that, and they go woke, can they say to that bank, hey, quit issuing credit cards? We don't like it. Our policy, our national worldwide policy is against that. Stop issuing them. Can they do that?
Mr. Meyer.
Mr. Chairman, Senator French, I'm not sure who they is. Who would want to tell me? Can the bank do that, or the customer, or?
Well, I'm trying not to, Mr. Chairman, trying to not mention the big names like,
You're in committee, you can, as long as it's not in a disparaging manner,
yeah,
you can
like
use.
Visa or MasterCard, the big ones that bank in the fine print says this is Visa. Maybe it's Bank of Cheyenne. I don't know what the banks are down here. But it says, now, and their policies say, no firearms, we're not gonna do those transactions, and they find out that the Bank of Cheyenne, there's a lot of firearm purchases. Can they say to the Bank of Cheyenne, Visa or MasterCard, no more issuing your bank cards. We disagree with what you're doing. We're pulling the plug on you.
Mr. Meyer?
Mr. Chairman, Senator French, I don't believe that they can say you can't use this card anymore. What some banks have done is said, because of the processing, which was the source of that problem with the financial industries and the firearm stuff, was that some processing companies will say, we don't want to process for firearms. Well, that's those guys, and that has nothing to do with your Wyoming banks. In fact, it puts us in a heck of a disadvantage. So we can't turn around and say, they can't tell us not to issue these cards, and if they were to do so, there's enough competition that those banks will go to, if one said Visa, they'll go to MasterCard or somebody else. They can always do that. But it's not the cards themselves, it's the processing of those cards, and that's where the problem comes in for those who are processing.
Senator McEwen, you have something?
Yeah, I kind of want to go back to what's really going on here. And nobody's saying it's the small local banks that are even involved in this. Because the truth of the matter is, at midnight, every night, my point of sale system will download every credit card transaction, every debit card transaction, and it'll go to a place like First Data or one of the processing companies. Now, many of the processing companies are owned by a lot of the chain banks. So I think you're both kind of right on this, but at the end of the day, my local bank doesn't see my credit card transactions or my debit card transactions. It goes straight to the processing company. Once it gets there, they will assign it the merchant code. And that is all put into different categories. But one of the things they suck out of my system are the UPC sales. And we're kind of saying the same thing and we're not. You're right, it's not driven by UPCs. They're grouped into a category, and then there's a store code. I have a code for supermarket, and I'm charged based on volume and type of store. So I think I like your amendment, and I think this is a great bill. I think we got to throw another amendment in there, though, where we're actually more focused on the credit card processing companies because they have all the data. They have the information. And I get it, the local banks don't. So please work with us so we get this right. But at the end of the day, I'm going to go back to what I said earlier. I don't want the federal government knowing if I buy a Twinkie because I don't believe they'll use it for good cause. So I think we're closer here. Like I said, I like your amendment. I'm going to talk to the bill sponsor, and I think we can move this forward. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Chairman, if I might,
Mr. Meyer, and then we'll go to Senator Pappas.
Senator, I will tell you that, every place that they have the pre-assigned merchant category code. So that has really nothing to do with the UPC, but I do think that those product codes are pain. And some people use them, like I say, you can use that probably for inventory. You can do it to change prices so that when you go through the grocery store, you just scan it, it puts the right price on whatever. These are I'm talking about the merchant credit codes or category codes that identify who we are, who that merchant is. And frankly, this all started with the idea that if they did this kind of thing, then it would be easier for the merchants to kick out 1099s way back when. That's what started this. But they, of course, have evolved to a point where it's just plumb ridiculous. And that's where we don't think that they ought to have any business in your stuff either. If I had another amendment on there and I'd go through each page, I would delete bank on every line that there's a bank. I mean, just take that word out because it is not your banks. It is these credit card processing. It's the organizations that run this stuff that seem to be the most influenced by woke policies anyway, but it's not your banks.
Okay, Senator Pappas had a question. We'll go to him first.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, this whole bill confuses me because I don't see that it does anything. Okay, so if you look, we're talking about financial institutions shall not disclose customers' protected financial information. And then you go to the definition on page 6 of a financial institution means an entity other than a merchant involved in facilitating or processing a payment card transaction, including but not limited to banks, acquirer, gateway, et cetera, et cetera. Okay, we don't have an institution anywhere in this state that processes payment and card transactions that I know of. Okay, those are the big companies that do it. They're all out of state. And so this thing doesn't affect any banks. We're talking about financial institutions that process these things, right? We're not talking about any bank here in this state, even though the word bank happens to be in here a bunch of times. We're talking about financial institution, and we're not looking at anybody locally. No one in the state is affected by this bill. Now, the question is, does this bill do anything? Because it's making a requirement for someone outside of the state. It's requiring them to abide by our law. I don't know if that, I'm not an attorney. I don't know whether that can happen or not. But no one in the state assigns or uses these codes. I just don't know what this bill does. I'm not opposed to it, but I just don't know that it does us any good. Correct me if I'm wrong. Thank you.
Mr. Meyer, do you have anything to
Mr.
say?
Chairman, yes, Senator Pappas, I would agree with you to the most part, but what is bothering me is the fact that the banks can be held liable for somebody messing up and just doing this stuff. By listing the banks in there, we now have a target, no pun intended, on our backs for potential liability on something we have absolutely no control of. And that's the part that bothers me. The rest of the bill, I'm with you. I'd love to go after every one of them myself, but I don't know how that we can do that. But I just want to stop the liability on our banks.
Follow up?
Follow up.
Yeah, but I don't see that. Again, financial institution means an entity other than a merchant involved in facilitating or processing a payment card transaction, including but not limited to a bank. If a bank is not doing that in this state, then they're not a financial institution according to this definition. How can they be held liable?
Mr. Chairman, I'd point out you, Senator, that starting on page 12 going forward, civil actions, I think as the banking commissioner mentioned, financial institutions is defined other places too. But if you turn around and you say here, it's a financial institution and it says the word bank, then all of a sudden I may be liable for something because somebody thinks that code got out. And that's what we don't want.
Anybody else for Mr. Meyer? Yeah, Senator Ide.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a quick question. Sounds like an international organization, ISO, I don't remember the full name of that. Sounds like they're sort of the boogeyman at the top of the food chain, effectively, on how everybody has to comply with these merchant codes. That was kind of my takeaway anyway. I just wanted to make sure that I'm understanding that right, and why are we involved with an international company that is trying to take our freedoms away? Thank you.
Mr. Meyer.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, Senator Ide, yes, it stands for the International Organization of Standardization. And that is an organization which does not include member bank, doesn't have banks as members, but this is an organization that has set up through these processing organizations how to track these things by using these merchant category codes. So it really is something that was set up through that ISO and the processors. It has nothing to do with the banks.
Okay. Sit tight. We might have some more questions for you.
Sure, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for your time.
We'll continue on with testimony. Come on up. Please introduce yourself to the committee.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My name is Bobby Frank, here on behalf of Wyoming's credit unions.
And my name is Shane Schultz, also on behalf of Wyoming's Credit Unions with Brownstein Law Firm.
Thank you for being here today.
You bet. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. First, our comments are premised on our understanding on page 6, lines 10, the discussion you just had on financial institution and the definition that based on the language on line 12, including but not limited to, could potentially include credit unions as being affected by this proposed bill. In light of that, we won't belabor Mr. Meyer's comments, but only reiterate concurrence with his comments. The financial institutions, including the credit unions in Wyoming, also do not control the merchant codes. Those are set by rule by those companies, and as Mr. Meyer described, is something that's completely out of our control. I would also add, just to assure folks and members of credit unions, that there is federal statute and regulations that prohibit credit unions from sharing information with third parties subject to limited exceptions. One of those is response to a lawful summons, subpoenas, etc. None of the exceptions would allow a credit union to provide gun purchase information or even that the purchases were made at a gun shop with a firearm merchant code without a subpoena or a search warrant, etc. So we just want to clarify that information cannot be shared by a credit union on a credit union member today.
So I don't have much to add other than it was the language that I think had myself concerned when in talking to Bobby on the matter of including but not limited to in the financial definitions, just in understanding whether or not that would cover credit unions.
Okay. Any questions for either Ms. Frank or Mr. Schultz? I have a question for probably you and the bill sponsor. I'm looking at the definition of financial institution that's already in our statute. And it's completely different than the one on the bill. The financial institution in the statute says means a bank, savings and loan association, trust company, or state chartered credit union. And there's a big difference between what these two are. Have any comment on that?
Yes, Mr. Chairman. What I have discovered in reviewing bills on behalf of credit unions in my short time is under Title 13. There are several different definitions of financial institutions. Some may include credit unions. Some indicate state chartered credit unions, of which we don't have any. Some are somewhat open-ended. So you can go to those different provisions in the statute and find any number of definitions.
Thank you for
Mr.
that.
Chairman.
Yeah, Senator Pappas.
I had this conversation once with LSO in another committee, and there are many things that we define multiple different times in statute. And, but the definition, if we put a definition in this particular section of statute,
It applies for that.
the courts will only use that definition when as they apply to law, so that all those other definitions, they can't, that's the reason we put them in there, defining it for this purpose. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you for that clarification, Senator Pappas. Any further questions? We appreciate your testimony.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, continue on with public comment. We need to move her along here. We're at 1:15. We've got to be back in at 2 o'clock. We still have a whole nother bill to go through, so come on up. Introduce yourselves to the committee. Thanks for being here.
All right, good afternoon, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. I am Mara McManaman, fourth generation Wyomingite from Torrington and Goshen County. I am a disabled veteran here as a private citizen. I am in support of this bill 100%. I would ask you all to please vote aye on this bill. Thank you, and I stand for questions.
Thank you. We'll go to you, Mr. Moody. Please introduce yourself.
Okay. Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Name is Mark Moody, resident Laramie County, member of Gun Owners of America, National Rifle Association, Wyoming Gun Owners, and USCCA. I also support 100%. I urge an aye vote. I was looking at the bill. I don't see firearm accessories mentioned within sentences, mentioning protection with firearms and ammunition. I was thinking too, we need to also protect firearm accessories such as magazines, silencers, laser sights. I mean, I could go on. I know where it's mentioned on page 2, line 21, those two words are utilized. Maybe an amendment, if the sponsor and you guys are okay, include firearm accessories, because I know that's another one they like to track our magazine sizes and all that, especially in some particular states. And I will stand for questions.
Thank you. Any questions for Mr. Moody or Ms. McManaman? Sorry, that's a mouthful. Thank you for your testimony. Thank you for taking the time to come today. Appreciate it. Mr. Moline, welcome back.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Brett Moline. I guess the more I listen, the more confused I get on this bill, but we dang sure got to do something. When legal, lawful transactions are coming, and, some of them getting denied because of you bought something that's legal, we've got to do something. And I didn't encourage this bill to go forward to, maybe we need to refine it, or you folks need to refine it, but something needs to be done so we're not interfering with legal, lawful transactions. With that, Mr. Chairman, I'd sit for any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Moline. Any questions for Mr. Moline? Thank you, sir. Thank you for being here today. Any further comment, public testimony on Senate File 171? I'll invite the bill sponsors to come back up.
Mr.
Oh,
Chairman?
yes, Senator Pappas.
May I ask Mr. Meyer to come back up? I have a question.
Mr. Meyer, do you mind coming back up?
Mr. Chairman, we also have 2 people on.
Oh, that's right. I forgot about the Zoom. Thank you, Judy.
So, Mr. Chairman?
Go ahead, Senator Pappas.
Mr. Meyer, my question is, we've been talking about credit card processing companies and the way they process codes, but what happens to debit cards? Because they come directly out of the bank. Do they get these codes put on them as well? Or, because they won't go through or do they go through a national processing company?
Mr. Chairman, Senator Pappas, even though they're a debit card that comes directly out of your account, they're still using those with the merchant category code. Those still do not go to the banks.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Meyer. I guess we'll go to Zoom first before we go back to the bill sponsors. Judy, who's first on Zoom? Okay. Ms. St. Louis, please turn on your camera and your microphone, introduce yourself, and welcome to Revenue.
Please turn on your microphone.
Oh, sorry. I'm going to wait until the next bill, if that's all right.
Okay.
Thank you.
Hang tight, we'll come back to you. Mr. Worrell, you're up next.
Mr. Worrell, you need to turn on your video and your microphone, please.
unmute there. Can you hear me, Mr. Chairman?
Yes, sir.
Okay, my name is John Worrell. I'm recently retired as the Washakie County Attorney and also as the President of the Wyoming Association of County and Prosecuting Attorneys. I am now working with Mr. Odekoven as a lobbyist for the Wyoming Association of Sheriffs and Chiefs of Police. I wanted to address very specifically Section 2 of this bill, starting on line 20 on page 4 and running thereafter. It's a very technical thing that I want to address, and it is this. The reference in the bill talks about liability of a governmental entity is waived as pertains to violations of Wyoming statute, the newly created ones, 13-10-405 and 406A. I would point out that 13-10-405 pertains solely to financial institutions, however you wish to define those. There's no reference in there to a governmental entity, so I don't think it's appropriate that somehow government would be liable for that. And then 406A, then I think there's there's a number of different damage provisions that are contained in there. That's what those are. They are not related to misbehavior. They might be tied to misbehavior or some actionable activity by a governmental entity, but they don't define what that is. That's defined in section 1-39-122 as either negligent or intentional actions on the part of the governmental entity. So I think the only place in the bill that I could see that governmental entities would have responsibility would be respecting section 13-10-404, which governs the requirements for the issuance of a subpoena. Again, that appears to pertain mostly to financial institutions, so I'm struggling to find out how law enforcement could be liable, and I'm speaking primarily in terms of law enforcement. But if there is a place where they could, it would be there. If they issued some kind of an investigatory subpoena or matter of that nature, possibly improperly. First of all, the financial institution, according to this statute, then doesn't have to honor that subpoena and could use a motion to quash. Mr. Meyer can address those things for us better than I. However, if you wish to have a portion of that section that deals with liability of governmental entities, that would seem to be the only one that applies. So I believe it would be appropriate to amend section 2 beginning at line 20 and strike references to 13-10-405 and 406A and substitute the 13-10-404 and leave it at that. That's all I have.
Thank you, Mr. Worrell. Any questions? Any questions? Thank you, sir. We appreciate your comments. We will get with the bill sponsors and get answers to those great questions. Thank you. Okay, anybody else on Zoom, Judy?
No.
Okay. Bill sponsors, I see Senator Larson and Senator Bouchard, do you both want to come up? Can you answer some of those questions? Senator Larson, I have a question regarding the most recent comment, which was on the, we're creating a new section 139, 122. What is your response to what we just heard?
Mr. Chairman, that was, and I'm not sure, I didn't get with LSO and discuss that part, so I think that probably is
Could be a drafting
good idea
error,
to.
a drafting error.
Yes,
Yeah.
I think that'd be a good idea to check with them and see.
Okay.
And I should have,
Committee, did you have any questions for the bill sponsors before we do this bill? Do you have any final words, any last words, Senator?
I do. I guess I'm concerned that we're thinking about maybe taking out the banks and such. And they are the ones that are signing contracts with these, if they have their own credit card, with these providers of the credit card, I don't know what you want to call them, that are gathering the processing. There we go, thank you. And they could do a little bit of pushback on that in their contracts with them, and say we're very concerned about this, and I think we ought to leave it in there.
Okay. Senator Pappas?
So, Senator Larson, would you have us then, since the banks are not involved in any of that, and I mean, would they then just not issue any Wyomingites credit cards? I mean, what would, in order for them to cover their liability under this bill, that's the way I see it. I get my credit card taken away from me if I got it through a local bank. So that's taking away local banks' ability to issue credit cards. I don't think that's good business policy. Is that what I'm hearing?
Senator Larson?
Can I get a little help here? Call a friend?
Sure. Senator Bouchard?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Senator Pappas. I think we're narrowed down on some narrow things, but when you look at the big scope of what happens, when you go down to your bank and you say, hey, I want to process credit cards, they pull out a form that's tied to the contract that they contract with the bigger bank. They're all holding hands. They all have responsibility to do this together. So if you take out the banks that don't process credit cards, that don't do that other end, they're not going to be affected by this bill. The ones that are going to be affected are the ones that actually the customer walks in. Let's just use an example. Senator McEwen goes and changes processor, goes down to his local bank and fills out a contract to an agreement to process cards. They're going to reciprocate and do business together, and it's going to go through the local bank into the bigger bank system. They're going to tie into the bigger. There's only like 6 big banks that do the credit card processing, but they're in a fiduciary contract together to do that. So the other guys, it's not going to affect them. The other banks that are saying here they don't do it anyway, yeah, this isn't going to affect them. It's only going to affect the people that signed a contract in this state to process credit cards, and that ties all the way down from that local bank to the credit card processing bank, because they are in contract together.
Mr. Chairman, yeah, follow up. So I understand that, and if there's 5 or 6 big guys out there that do this, but they issue these cards to our local banks, right? And they're not gonna care about what we here in Wyoming. We're very few customers. I don't think they're gonna change their policies. So that means they just won't issue these cards to our local banks, right?
Senator
No?
Bouchard?
Am I wrong?
Senator Larson?
Mr. Chairman, Senator Pappas, you're talking about a credit card. I'm not talking about a card. I'm talking about the processing. Because these cards go all, you could have a credit card from Dubai. They come in, use the card here, going through a processor that's here, that was signed on to a local bank. Somebody has to say, we can't take this data and use it here. That's what this bill is doing.
Mr. Chairman, that's not my understanding from the testimony I heard. None of these, we have no control over that here. It's only controlled at a processor outside the state, not any bank here. That's what I heard, and that's kind of what I believe as well. Because we don't have banks that process, there's no processing here in Wyoming.
Senator Bouchard?
Mr. Chairman, Senator Pappas, there is a contract at that local bank that's tied to the processing. They're in business together. Everybody's getting a piece of that money as that card moves through the system. That's how they all make money. So if I agree with what you're saying that these guys are just signing up a processor, letting it happen, but it's way over here happening over here. Well, that's only true if somebody wasn't making money. They're making money at every contact point of that contract.
Mr. Chairman.
Yes, sir.
But all these processors are doing the same thing, right? All 5 and 6 of them. They're not going to care what our law says. And that's what I'm getting at. I'm getting at that now our banks will not be able to issue credit cards to our citizens.
Mr. Chairman,
Senator Bouchard.
it's not the credit card. It's the processing. We're not talking about issuing credit cards. We're talking about processing credit cards.
But Mr. Chairman, you can't separate the issuance of a credit card and its processing. They come hand in hand.
Senator Bouchard. Well, let's,
Maybe I don't understand, Mr. Chairman.
there's a lot of gray area here. Senator Bouchard, if this were to become law, Wyoming has a certain set of rules that we expect banks and financial institutions to follow. If they violate our law, even if it's a big multinational processor that we all know, there's only two, it's a monopoly, right? There's no competition, and that's where the choke point is, and that's why they're doing this to us. Would Wyoming courts or would a Wyoming citizen be able to have standing to sue, and would this apply to them?
Mr. Chairman, I'm sure that there are things in the contract that say they can't hold, like the processor can't, they hold them harmless at the bank. And so I don't know what's in those protections. But if we don't move somewhere to say this is private data, and if we don't start here, where do we start?
Okay. Any more questions? Thank you, guys. We'll close public comment. And committee, what's your pleasure?
I'll move the bill.
Moved by Senator French.
Second.
Second by Ide. Discussion on the bill or amendments on the bill? Senator Ide.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good testimony, both sides. I'm in favor of the bill. The best comments I guess I heard and from Mr. Moline back there and from a couple of their senators, if we don't start here, where do we start? We need to push back. And, sometimes that's painful. And I don't know, you don't want to get the banks or the merchants or the customers so they can't transact, but we need to defend our freedoms here and our Second Amendment stuff. So how that happens, this is a good place to start. And I think it's good to have this discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Ide. Anybody want to propose an amendment?
Yeah, I propose a few amendments. First one, I'll go ahead and propose the amendment given to us by Mr. Meyer. And so all of those items as a single amendment.
Okay. Any discussion on the amendment? Hearing none. All those in favor of adopting the amendment provided to us by Mr. Meyer, please say aye. Aye. Those opposed? That amendment has been adopted. Any other amendments?
Mr. Chairman? Yes,
Senator Pappas?
I agree. Again, I don't like the idea of putting banks in there. I know the good bringer wants banks tied into it, but our banks here don't have anything to do with the processing, and we've been talking about processing and not banks. So I'd actually like to go through the bill and remove those references. So can I do them all in one, or do you want to do it page by page, Mr. Chairman? It's up to
I
you.
think we do a conceptual amendment and walk
Okay.
us through what you're
So
thinking here after he's done.
if you'd like to ask a
Oh, sure,
question.
Senator
before-
McEwen.
Yes. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As I read the bill, if a bank is not processing the cards, they're kind of protected by the bill itself because they're not doing the action. So maybe it would be in place for later. So I just wanted kind of everybody's opinion on it as they read through it. Because I think you made a good point earlier.
Yep.
If a bank isn't processing credit cards, this doesn't do anything to them.
Mr. Chairman?
Senator Pappas.
And that was my point to Mr. Meyer, but Mr. Meyer did rightly agree that civil action is according to this bill, civil action is available. If civil action wasn't available, I mean, then maybe I would agree with that. But since it is in the bill, you know, someone could construe a bank and drag them into a court. And probably either under discovery, they would throw it out, or even during a court case, they would find that truly it doesn't fit the definition of financial institution. But why go there? Let's just take the banks out. I know the good bringer of the bill doesn't want to do that, but that's what my amendment's going to do. And committee, you can decide whether you want to support it or not, okay?
Okay, so the motion is to remove,
So the motion on line 1 is to remove banks, banking, and finance, and
Page one, excuse me. I'm sorry.
page 1, line 1. Remove banks, banking, and finance, and substitute financial institutions. So it'll be an act relating to financial institutions. Okay? Then on page 3, line 2, just strike the word banks and the comma. And on page 4, line 7, strike the word bank and substitute financial institution. And then on page 6, line 12, put a period after card transactions. Strike the balance of line 12, all of 13 and 14. Well, actually, you would, instead of a period, you'd put a semicolon after transactions on line 12. And I believe, yeah, I think as far as I believe that that's everything. But could we also include that if there's any words of any word bank that it's our intent that it gets stricken? I think I got them all, but you know, I was going through it pretty quickly, Mr. Chairman.
you get
So-
the idea.
So that's
Okay.
my amendment, and yeah.
Any discussion? Senators? Senator McEwen?
I think as I read that line 10 through 14,
Are you on page 6?
yes,
Okay.
when we get rid of acquire gateway or payment card network,
Excuse me. I
that's
agree.
everybody.
I agree. Can I modify that?
Absolutely.
Strike including, no, leave including by not limited, just strike the word bank.
Okay.
So change the word a to an and strike the word bank. Yeah, you're right, correct. Thank you for that correction. Although, Mr. Chairman,
Senator Pappas?
when we leave the wording included but not limited to, that still opens it up to everybody. So frankly, I think maybe my first amendment, my first inclination is that it means an entity other than a merchant involved in facilitating or processing a payment card transaction. So basically, we're talking about people who process credit cards. I don't care who they are.
So this will limit it strictly to processors.
Limited just to processors. Yeah, so.
So by inserting a colon after transaction, it narrows it clean down to
Yeah,
processors.
there's really no need to continue being specific.
Okay.
Thank you.
Mhm. Okay, any comments, discussion on the amendment?
Mr. Chairman, and if anyone's got heartburn with any of those, I'd be open to dividing that amendment.
Sure. I think it's a pretty substantive amendment that I'd like to spend more time on, and instead of doing it on the fly in committee, I think it'd be a good committee of the whole amendment. I would like to get with get more parties together on where this bill needs to land in our statutes, because I want to be able to have jurisdiction when they break our laws, that we can apply the proper penalties to the proper people and not get the wrong people caught up into our bill. So I may resist this amendment, but conceptually, I see where you're going with this, and I might support it on committee of the
So,
whole.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes, sir.
I'd probably be an aye on this bill with
Right.
this. Without it.
We need some work,
I
yes.
probably will not be, because I think we're targeting people who have no say in this thing, and I want to take out the banks and everybody else, the credit card companies as well, that may be targets in a lawsuit that, anybody can sue anybody, right? And so if we leave them in there, it's more fodder for whoever goes after them. And I agree. Again, my original statement was that I don't think this bill does anything, because I don't think we can go after the big boys. I don't think so. Again, I'm not an attorney, but I really see it more as a solution looking for a problem. So anyhow, thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Are you guys ready for the question? Or you have questions, discussion
Just a quick,
on the amendment?
just a quick question, Mr. Chair. I'm not sure what the bringer of the bill would think, but after talking to Mr. McCune here, would it be better to just do a committee of the whole amendment? That's kind of my
Well, that's
question.
kind of what the discussion is, but we have a motion on the table, which is Senator Pappas's motion that we need to discuss and either vote it up or vote it down. And we'll discuss what we do later.
Again, Mr. Chairman, I agree. I mean, it could be a very good committee of the whole amendment. It's just that without it, I can't
This
be an
affects your
aye
vote
vote.
on the bill.
Not that it matters, you guys are
Right.
going to vote for it, but
Sure. We got you.
yeah.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right, let's vote on the amendment. All those in favor of Senator Pappas's amendment to strike bank and insert financial institution and make conforming amendments throughout the bill, please say aye. Those opposed? No.
No.
Okay, so that amendment has failed. We're back on the bill.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes, sir.
Uh,
Senator Pappas.
I'd like further amendments, and frankly, on page 4, the liability, financial privacy, I think there's problems there. Again, I don't want to see a governmental entity being liable for any of this stuff. And I'm not so sure I tracked in the whether we just, I know he mentioned 1310-404, and
That still doesn't make any sense.
Uh,
Yeah.
frankly, I would like to just delete it. Lines 20 through lines 2, just delete the whole liability, financial privacy. I don't know that it's needed. So I'll make that motion.
And I'll second that. And we'd have a friendly amendment. We'd also, on page 4, line 17, delete reference to 139, 122.
Yeah, correct. And Mr. Chairman, if I don't mind it coming back if there's a good reason to have liability for financial liability for financial privacy for other people. But as I heard testimony, these sections are not the ones. So maybe on a committee, a whole amendment, if someone does some research, if we want to bring that paragraph back, I'd be okay with that.
Yeah, I agree. I think this might have been a drafting error. We'd have to, I think as a committee, I'll second your motion
And since we're, Mr. Chairman, since
Yeah.
we're all talking about government liability, can we go ahead and strike the words on page 13, line 2, or government entity? Government entity entity would not ever do that. I mean, they would never cause customer protected financial information to be disclosed in violation of state law.
I have a little bit of heartburn over taking it out of that portion, because if somebody in a government entity did cause the customer's private protected financial information to be disclosed in violation of this act, I think that's a pretty bad thing, and I think they should have a remedy for that. But
Okay,
that's-
let's
we
leave that
need to
one
leave
out
that
then.
off of there. We can
Sure.
address that separately. Committee discussion on removing this 139, 122 from the bill. Any discussion, questions? Hear none. Question being called. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. All those opposed?
No, no, no.
Okay, that has failed. It has not been adopted. Back on the bill. Okay. Anyway, question on the bill. Judy, please call the roll.
Aye. Aye.
Senator McEwen,
Aye.
Senator Pappas,
No.
Chairman Bateman.
Aye. Oh, Eva.
Mr. Chairman, there were 4 ayes and 1 no on Senate File 171.
Senate File 171 has passed the Senate Revenue Committee. Next bill up for our consideration is Senate File 135, repeal gun-free zones, government buildings and meetings, sponsored by Senator Bouchard. Senator Bouchard.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Anthony Bouchard, Senate District 6. I'm bringing to you Senate File 135. This is a simple bill. I mean, you can see that this is probably the smallest gun bill that I've ever had my hands on, I can tell you. So that said, what it does, it just, these are the only places in Wyoming law that actually has a restriction to government. And you can see them on page 2, where it says any meeting of a government entity or any meeting of the legislature or a committee thereof. And most of your policy in Wyoming is then done through the Building Commission. So this all ties just to that. Now, there are some executive orders that are still on the books. We'll have to see how that plays out. Obviously, it's hard to go after executive orders, but this is a start. This gets everybody talking. What this bill does specifically, it points to 68104, and that's basically in our laws now. People who can legally conceal carry, it's tied to 922G of the federal code. So our state law points to that code and says, if you meet this criteria, you can possess a gun. If you can possess a gun under that code, you can conceal carry in Wyoming. So, I mean, I guess I could, if anyone has any specific questions about how that works, I could answer those questions. But in essence, what this bill does is just moves the policy back, puts it back onto the Building Commission to start backing off on where they have restrictions. And obviously it would affect us right here in this room. And as you very well know, what's stopping someone from coming in here? I mean, if somebody wanted to come in here and do damage to any of us, they could come right in here, and there's doors that go right into this basement. There's not guards at all these doors. By the time that someone was called here, considerable damage could be done. And I think that I've testified across the state on repealing gun-free zones. We had a case in Casper where the city council actually voted to strip themselves of the ability to even protect themselves. And I don't want to get into any details, but I will tell you there was a member of that council that had had some troubles and death threats and realized It wasn't such a smart thing to do. And I'm just kind of encouraging everyone here to understand, everyone here is at risk of some crazed person, because that's where it happens, in gun-free zones. A sign out there means that law-abiding citizens will not carry their guns. And that's what we're trying to do, is back this up to where honest, law-abiding citizens are on equal footing with people who don't follow the law. So I'll stand for any questions.
Any questions, Senator Bouchard? Senator, I recognize this bill. This was one I got to the governor's desk back in 17. And there was a lot of misconceptions about what the bill did and didn't do. I think it's important to point out, as you did, the 68104A lists the places you cannot carry concealed. What it doesn't say is, and what people don't realize is, especially Romanet 1, any meeting of a governmental entity, you can open carry at a city council meeting already. This only applies to concealed carry. Do you have a comment on that?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, I mean, unless the council or other government entity has made some kind of other rule, you're 100% correct. Well, because what this particular piece of statute does is talks about concealed carry. So technically, under state law right now, they don't really have a law in the books to open carry in the Capitol, although they enforce it. It's just nobody's challenged it hard enough yet. When I first got involved in the gun rights fight, I was standing outside on the Capitol lawn, and they came and told me, they said we had to get off the property with guns. And I challenged them and said to the police officer, I said, I'd like to see it in writing where you're telling me I can't be on the Capitol lawn. And he said, well, we have our own Capitol statutes. And I said, I want to see them. I'm going to stay right here till you bring them back. And it's one of the nice officers that we've got. You know, we became friends over the years because he was here so long. But he came back and said, you're right. There is no law that we can't make you get off the Capitol grounds on the front lawn. And so anyways, if you look at specifically how this law works, you 100% correct on the open carry.
And Senator Bouchard, wouldn't it, we hear a lot of arguments about the intimidation factor of open carry and why does somebody need to have a 45 on their hip at a government meeting? Wouldn't you rather have people concealed carry so you don't know if they're carrying or not? It's not there in plain sight and it's less intimidating, because we hear that argument a lot. Wouldn't you prefer, ladies, keep it in your purse, guys, keep it concealed?
Mr. Chairman, when we were passing constitutional carry in 2011, that was a discussion on the floor of the House. And what many of the people in the House chambers said was, wait a minute, you can open carry all around the state? And the answer was yes. And well, we would rather have it that people can conceal carry so we don't disrupt things with weapons. So, and as you know, right now, people carry, when constitutional carry was passed in this state, I mean, I don't know if you remember the conversation, but the media contacted me and said, we haven't seen any problem a year later. And my answer was, yeah, you're not going to see a problem. Law-abiding citizens aren't the ones that have the problem. It's the criminals that are, and you saw the crime rate drop actually that first year, because criminals don't want to come where people are armed either. So, okay. But yeah, anyway, back to your question though, specifically, concealed carry is a good thing. If you're doing it right, nobody knows.
Thank you, Senator Bouchard. Any questions for Senator Bouchard? Seeing none. Thank you, sir. Stick around. We might need you back. We'll open it up to public comment. Anybody from the agencies want to testify? I don't see any agency folks. We'll go ahead and open up the general public comment. Come on up. State your name, introduce yourself to the committee, and welcome to Senate Revenue.
Thank you, Chair Beitman and members of the committee. I thank you for the opportunity to testify. I am Beth Howard, a longtime resident of Cheyenne, and I am here to voice my opposition to Senate File 135. I am testifying today as a volunteer with Wyoming Moms Demand Action for Gun Sense in America. You know, throughout this legislative session, I have read and heard that Wyoming is experiencing a mental health crisis, and it's one we're working hard to find solutions for. Following a suicide, a murder, or a mass shooting, I've often heard people say it's not a gun problem, it's a mental health problem. It could be both. A person with a firearm who intends to harm themselves or others is a deadly combination. It is imperative that we consider this fact when we look at Senate File 135. I'm fully aware that 4 out of the 5 members of this committee are sponsors of the bill. I ask that you please hear my concerns. I oppose Senate File 135 because this bill forces hidden loaded guns into local government meetings and into meetings of the legislature at a time when a risk from political extremism is high. We should be empowering local officials to protect public safety and keep guns out of places where essential government functions are taking place. We have seen political rhetoric continue to increase in Wyoming and within individual political parties. Our elected officials and citizens often no longer listen to each other and have become more radicalized. Throwing guns into the mix makes an already combustible situation even more dangerous. We should be able to attend government meetings, the foundation of our democracy, without worrying about who is carrying a concealed weapon and what their reaction is going to be if we have a political disagreement. All of us should feel comfortable advocating for our communities without fearing for our lives. There are gun rights and there are gun wrongs, and this bill is all wrong. Please vote no on Senate File 135. I stand for questions.
Thank you, Ms. Howard. Any questions? I do have a question. Today we had a disruption in the Senate chamber right before lunch, and this person, I saw them come in and I watched them, and they came in and sat right in front of us at the plexiglass. And the person was acting very bizarre. And my heart started to race. I thought, well, is this person armed? This person looked very agitated and not right. I immediately thought to myself, man, I wish I had my gun with me right now, because if this person were to open fire, we are sitting ducks, sitting down at the bottom of that chamber. I turned around and looked to get the sergeant at arms attention, and he was not there. This person got more agitated as the vote went on, and I got more and more nervous, like, should I get off the floor, because this person looks like they're really going to lose their mind here. I get what you're saying, but I should be able to protect myself. Why should my Second Amendment rights end at the Capitol steps? And when I'm sitting here trying to do the public's work and worried about my safety for myself and my ability to protect myself, if that person would have pulled out a gun and started shooting at us, we would have had a serious problem, because we're all unarmed, because we're all law-abiding citizens, and I left my gun at home. What are your thoughts to that?
I appreciate that. I have twin sons. One is an active duty Marine and one is an Army veteran. Both, one served in Iraq and one served in Afghanistan. They would never advocate to have you have a weapon in a place like this, because the chances of innocent people being shot as you try to take on whoever it is you're concerned about are high. We've seen it happen in other situations. The other thing is our current Wyoming concealed carry permit is so weak. You can take an online class. You do not have to own a handgun or ever have shot one to be able to take the online permit that you get to the sheriff's department and get a handgun. I don't want people who don't know how to use a handgun to be bringing them into public places like this. It increases the danger for you and for everybody else. Besides that, since we're a concealed carry state without a permit, I just don't see how this is enforceable. The public is going to hear that, hey, you can take a gun to the Capitol now And we won't know if they have a permit or don't have a permit. We won't know. And we won't know if they have a mental health problem and they're coming here specifically to do harm to you. This
So we'll
bill
agree to
isn't.
disagree then.
I wish for you, we'll agree to disagree. I would wish for you to be safe, but I don't think this bill is going to get you there.
Thank you. Thank you, ma'am. Senator McEwen, do you have a question?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So do you believe somebody who would come in here and start a mass shooting or a murder, or even with a mental health problem, is going to say to themselves, oh, that's illegal to carry a gun. So since it's illegal, I'm not going to do it? Is that your belief, ma'am?
Ms. Howard?
Thank you, Chair Beitman and Senator McCown. That is not my belief, but my belief is that more guns in a public situation doesn't keep anyone safer. Whether they are a licensed gun owner or whether they are bringing an illegal firearm in here. I mean, Wyoming doesn't require us to submit mental health information for involuntary commitment to the federal background check database. By federal statute, if you've been involuntarily committed, you're not supposed to be able to legally purchase a firearm. So I can't begin to tell you how many people who shouldn't own firearms already do in Wyoming, because we're not checking for that. So there are other places to start to keep you safe, and this is not the best one.
Thank you, Ms. Howard.
Thank you.
Okay. Anybody else wish to testify on the bill? Dr. Tribely, did you want to come up? Come on up. Welcome to Revenue. Please introduce yourself.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman. My name is Erin Taylor. I'm the Executive Director of the Wyoming Association of Community College Trustees, and we're here today because obviously you as legislators, government meetings take place in our community colleges, and so it does pique our interest. Absolutely respecting and recognizing the Second Amendment rights, as we've always testified. However, the locally elected trustees do often have policies on when and how firearms may be utilized and brought into the community college campuses. Oftentimes, there are concerns about safety and security dollars and the ability of the colleges to have responsive measures. And that is a conversation that's happened over the years, particularly in front of the Appropriations Committee. And when we're talking about ability to lock down a campus, having armed security officers on campus, things like that. But I do have with me today Dr. Tribely, who's the president at Sheridan College, and he can provide you some real-world testimony to what it's like on the community college campus. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Taylor. Dr. Tribely.
Chair Beitman, members of the committee, it's a pleasure to be here. I'm going to mostly echo that sentiment from my colleague, Ms. Taylor, that we have locally elected boards who have the power now and the responsibility to make decisions to allow or not allow concealed carry. So that exists right now. And my main point being here is that you please respect that and give them that local control. They have the responsibility for that campus. They delegate that to me and my colleagues. I would say regarding other bills that are not before you, campuses are complex places. Young people are learning to be free and independent. There's alcohol, there's emotions, there's athletics, there's disappointment, there's student and staff discipline. So these are complex places that we then try to superimpose our Second Amendment rights, and we do believe in those Second Amendment rights. So I'm here to ask you to please respect the power, authority, and the responsibility of our local trustees and let them decide. Whether that's an amendment to your bill or not, that is what I'm asking you to do. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Tribely. Any questions for Dr. Tribely or Ms. Taylor? Thank you all for your testimony. Thank you. Come on up. Who's next? Somebody's making their way and, okay, we'll get you in. Welcome back.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good afternoon, and members of the committee. You may recall I am Mara McManaman. I am going to be very brief here. As the sponsor of the bill said, considerable damage could be done if we do not repeal gun-free zones. Please allow citizens the opportunity to protect themselves and others. I am in support of this bill 100%. I would ask you all to please vote aye. Thank you, and I sit for questions.
Any questions for Ms. McManaman? Got it that time. Seeing none, thank you. Mr. Moody?
Okay. Mark Moody again from Laramie County. Again, I support this bill 100%. And on a community college thing, in Colorado, our neighbor to the south, which is a little bit off us politically, they allow concealed carry on campuses with a permit, and they're not allowed to ban it. They have to follow state law. So that's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Moody. Any questions for Mr. Moody? Thank you. Thank you both for being up here and taking time out of your day to come testify. Welcome.
I'm Bob McLaurin with WHAM. We're opposed to this bill on the basis of preemption. We're not for guns. We're not against guns. We're for local control. And we believe this is a decision best left to city councils. Much agree with Mrs. Taylor. So thank you.
Thank you, Mr. McLaurin. Any questions for Mr. McLaurin?
Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for your testimony. Welcome, sir. Mr. Brown?
Mr. Chairman, Boyd Brown, Wyoming School Boards Association. Again, I would say that we've got pretty darn good laws out there right now regarding school districts and school boards' ability to either allow for some of their staff members to carry or not. And again, I'm trying to figure out if this affects school districts, and if it does, I would hope that we would amend out school districts and put them back in with the specific statutes regarding schools.
Thank you, Mr. Brown. Do you have any questions for Mr. Brown, committee? Thank you, Mr. Brown. Anybody else? Do we have any? I think we have a couple of Zoomers, don't we?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, we have Donna Shippen. No, I'm sorry.
I see Miss St. Louis.
We
Why
have
don't we let
Michelle
her in
St. Louis
first?
back with us.
Okay.
And
Well, your microphone, Judy, is.
Is it my microphone?
No, I think it's Miss Judy's, but
Okay. Hi, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. My name is Michelle St. Louis. I'm a membership coordinator of Wyoming Gun Owners, and thank you for allowing me to speak to you today on behalf of our members. I am testifying before you today in support of SF 135. And it is an old friend of WIGO's, as you pointed out, Mr. Chairman, that first came about in 2017, back when we were meeting in the Jonah building and you were in the other chamber. And as you remember, and you pointed out, it passed both houses, and the governor rubber stamped that bad boy and threw it right into the trash. One thing before I start, I don't think our fundamental right to bear arms should be up to local control. It's a fundamental right. That's not a local decision. And while other meetings may allow open carry, the Capitol currently prohibits firearms. So meetings held in the Capitol, such as this one, are gun-free zones where whether you are carrying open or concealed. As far as the college campuses goes, being a weapons-free zone didn't stop a madman with a crossbow from shooting a professor as he taught a class at Casper College. The sign did not save that man's life. But maybe perhaps while when the gentleman who was shooting first missed, if somebody in that classroom may have had a firearm, he may have been able to stop the shooter. Gun-free zones are a preferred target for wicked people who don't value life, nor are they concerned with laws or signs. These people look to harm those who are left defenseless and unable to defend themselves. Wyoming Gun Owners supports legislation that puts an end to gun-free zones, and this legislation is no different. The citizens of our great state should not have to have their rights infringed upon prior to entering buildings paid for with their tax dollars, and they should not be forced to be sitting ducks in order to attend government meetings such as this very meeting right here. We encourage a yes vote on this bill and oppose any weakening amendments. So let's get this bill across the finish line again, and this time maybe the governor will actually sign it. I'll stand for any questions.
Thank you, Ms. St. Louis. Any questions? Committee members? Seeing none, thank you for joining us today. Judy, who do we have left?
There's no one else online.
We lost the, okay. Nobody else on Zoom. Anybody else in the room wish to testify? Phil Sponsor, do you want to come back up and bring it home? Senator Bouchard? Specifically relating to the, I think Mr. Brown had a question on the applicability to school board meetings being considered a governmental entity. Do you have a comment on that or an answer to that question?
You know, I mean, the only thing that I see, Mr. Chairman, is that there's nothing that stops the bad guys from shooting those places up. I mean, we're only restricting, at the current time, we are restricting law-abiding citizens because the other people that will do damage aren't asking permission. So I know that's not the answer they want, but that's the reality.
Okay.
And I think that am I right? That's the only note I have written on my bill here to wrap it up is that the only thing we're doing is prohibiting law-abiding citizens with the way the laws are currently. And that's what this bill is going to reverse. All of the unwarranted claims of the mental health issues. There's nothing stopping someone that has a mental health issue to coming in this room in here. There's nothing stopping them except good people with guns, which we do not have right now because law-abiding citizens aren't coming in here with their guns. So one of the complaints that I did hear a little while ago was that they don't want to be in a place where there's guns. Well, Wyoming, I don't know where you would do that in Wyoming under our current laws. You go into most of these stores, even the big box stores do not have no gun signs. They allow the citizens to carry in their stores. We don't see the sky falling. We don't see all these problems that we keep hearing testimony of. Matter of fact, we do see those stories come up where the good guy, even when the police officer has opposition fire going on, we've seen where the good guys come in and help them. I mean, this is a recurring story. Citizens law-abiding citizens that are armed are good for society. And even the comment about people being possible targets of friendly fire. You know, we see the stats on this stuff that most people that carry a gun, it's a commitment. People don't just go, oh, hey, I'm going to carry a gun and they just do it. I mean, some people carry a gun, they say, I'm not going to do this anymore. This is work. I got to put this on. I got to holster it. I got to make sure I've went through my safety check. A lot of people don't carry guns for that reason. We see that with law-abiding citizens. The people that are carrying are possibly better in proficiency than some trained people. And I say trained, I'm trying to loosely not name anybody, but I'm saying people that have to carry guns in multiple capacities. Sometimes we see citizens that are adequately more trained than people that are required to carry guns. So I'll leave it at that, Mr. Chairman.
All right, thank you, Senator. Questions for Senator Bouchard? Okay, thank you, sir. Public comment is closed. Committee, what's your pleasure?
Move the bill.
Moved by McEwen, second by Ide. Any discussion? Question being called. Judy, will you please call the roll?
Senator French,
He left a proxy of aye.
Senator Ide,
Aye.
Senator McEwen,
Aye.
Senator Pappas?
No.
Chairman Beitman?
Aye.
Mr. Chairman, there are 4 ayes and 1 no on Senate File 135.
Okay, Senate File 135 is passed the Senate Revenue Committee, that clears the desk. Is